General Hospital spoilers tease whispers are swirling of an unexpected partnership on the horizon between Nina Reeves and Michael Corinthos, united by a shared goal to dismantle Drew Quartermaine. With Drew's monstrous manipulations, lying about Michael's Germany rejection of Willow Corinthos, and traumatizing Wiley Corinthos with false abandonment claims, pushing both to their limits, this alliance could spell his ruin. As Michael fights to maintain custody of Amelia and Wiley Corinthos and Nina seeks to protect Willow from Drew's control, could their uneasy truce topple him? Will their pact hold, or crumble under their rocky history? A shocking alliance forms. Nina and Michael, long at odds, could find common ground in their disgust for Drew's schemes. Nina's guilt over her fling with Drew might drive her to make amends in her own messed-up roundabout way. Michael, fueled by Drew's betrayal, might agree to team up, possibly leveraging some insider knowledge of Drew's overseas masterminding, should he chase down the truth about what happened at that burn clinic. If they pool resources, will their alliance expose Drew's lies? Or will their mutual distrust derail the plan? Drew's vulnerabilities may be exposed. Drew's grip on Willow through their engagement and his claim to help her regain visitation is faltering as his secrets pile up. Although a former partnership between Nina and Carly Spencer fell apart, a similar agreed-upon measure may work between Michael and Nina. Moreover, if Nina reveals their fling, maybe in a desperate plea to Willow, it could shatter Willow's trust, while Michael's evidence of Drew's wily manipulation could sink his credibility. Their combined efforts might even expose Drew's Esplanade deal as a front, catching the eye of Mayor Laura Collins. But if Drew senses their plot, his counterattack could exploit Nina's past or Michael's custody win. Can they outmaneuver him? Or will Drew turn the tables? Pact fraught with risk. Nina and Michael's alliance is a high-stakes gamble. Given their history of clashing, Nina's schemes once hurt Michael's family deeply. If they succeed, Drew's downfall could free Willow and reshape these broken families, but a misstep could fracture their trust. Will Nina and Michael's unlikely partnership be the key to Drew's downfall? Or will their fragile pact collapse, letting him slip away unscathed? Drew Cain had always considered himself a man of principle. Even when memories were stolen from him, even when life placed him in impossible positions, he clung to the idea of fairness, of doing the right thing even when it was hard. But in Port Charles, those principles were constantly tested, and recently, Drew found himself entangled in something far more twisted than he'd ever anticipated. The whisper of corruption had always surrounded the courtroom, especially in high-stakes cases involving the Corinthos family. But Drew never expected to find direct evidence of it, not until he accidentally stumbled across a string of encrypted documents stored in an old file on a drive left in Aurora Media's archives. What began as a casual review of outdated legal material soon became something much darker. The documents pointed toward a bribe, not just a passing reference or suspicion, but line items detailing payments made to a judge presiding over a corporate fraud case. A case Drew had a vested interest in, one that had ended favorably for him under highly unusual circumstances. He thought he'd won that battle on merit, but now it looked like someone had manipulated the outcome in his favor. And the most disturbing part? The transactions were routed through a shell company that Drew recognized, one tied to an account previously linked to Nina Reeves. Drew's mind immediately rejected the possibility. Nina had no motive. They were adversaries more often than not, especially after the fallout between her and Carly. But as he dug deeper, he discovered inconsistencies that couldn't be ignored. The bribe had been orchestrated behind the scenes by a third party, but the money originated from a corporate account Nina had once controlled while overseeing Crimson's integration into Aurora. It was a loophole Drew hadn't noticed before. A temporary merger strategy that had left financial access in the hands of a few executives, Nina included. At first, Drew tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe Nina's name had been used without her knowledge. But as he cross-referenced dates and tracked who was where at what time, the coincidences piled too high. He confronted her one evening in the Metro court. Nina was seated at her usual table, sipping a martini, looking exhausted and raw from yet another battle with Willow over visitation rights. She didn't expect Drew to appear, let alone sit down across from her with the kind of intensity usually reserved for the courtroom. "I need to ask you something," he said without greeting. "And I want the truth." Nina narrowed her eyes. "If this is about Willow." "It's not," he cut in. It's about a bribe. A judge. A corporate shell company tied to Crimson. Her expression changed instantly. Not to guilt but confusion, alarm, maybe even fear. What are you talking about? Drew watched her carefully. There was a bribe issued to the judge that ruled in my favor last year. The payment came from a source that links back to you. I need to know if you knew anything about it. Nina stared at him in disbelief, setting her glass down a little too hard. I've never bribed anyone in my life. Are you accusing me of fixing a trial on your behalf? Why would I even do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out, Drew said, leaning in. Because if you didn't do it, someone used your access to make it happen. And either way, someone's trying to take me down. For once, Nina didn't lash out. She seemed genuinely shaken. And that's when it clicked. Maybe she wasn't behind it. Maybe she was part of it without realizing it. She had been used before, by Valentine, by Liesel, by Sunny, and it wouldn't be surprising if someone had manipulated her finances again. But what neither of them realized at that moment was that someone else had already been watching from the sidelines, quietly putting the pieces together. Michael Corinthos. Michael had been keeping tabs on both Drew and Nina for months. His once unshakable alliance with Drew had fractured after Willow's health scare. When Drew had made choices Michael disagreed with, especially involving Carly and the insider trading scandal, Michael had started to suspect Drew wasn't as clean as he presented himself. Too many gray areas, too many convenient wins. When he caught wind of the same financial trail, he didn't confront Drew. He went to Nina. Michael showing up at Nina's office was unexpected, to say the least. Their relationship was still rocky, marred by past betrayals and complicated by his desire to keep Nina as far from his children as possible. But Michael wasn't here for an emotional reunion. He had a plan. I know about the bribe, he said, not even sitting. And I know Drew's trying to trace it back to you. Nina's face paled. Michael, I didn't. I know, he interrupted. I don't think you did it. But someone did. And I think Drew's hiding more than he's telling anyone. Nina crossed her arms. So what? Now you want to help me? That's rich. Michael hesitated, then nodded. Maybe I do. Because if we both want the truth, we're going to have to work together. Neither of us can take Drew down alone. It was a bizarre alliance. Michael, the calculating son of Sonny Corinthos. Nina, the estranged grandmother trying to stay relevant in her daughter-in-law's life. But both of them had the same enemy now, not out of vengeance but necessity. They needed to understand what Drew was involved in before the consequences spilled over into everything they cared about. They started with the judge. Michael used his tech connections to get access to sealed communications. What he found stunned even him. Private correspondence between the judge and an anonymous donor who promised political leverage in exchange for a favorable ruling. The tone of the emails wasn't neutral. It wasn't just business, it was personal. Someone had gone to extreme lengths to make sure Drew came out clean. And it wasn't just about the verdict. It was about image, legacy, control. And then came the real shock. The anonymous emails were sent from a masked server located in Aurora's old security network, the one Drew had personally overseen. Michael shared the information with Nina, who, despite her better judgment, felt something strange twist in her gut. She didn't want to believe Drew was capable of this. But what if he wasn't the hero? What if he'd let someone else take the fall so he could protect his empire? That night, Nina confronted Drew again. This time with Michael hiding just out of sight, recording their exchange. I've looked into the bribe, she said, voice sharp and trembling. And I know more than you think. You knew about it, didn't you? Maybe not at first, but later. You covered it up. Drew's face hardened. You don't know what you're talking about. Nina stepped closer. I didn't authorize anything. But someone used my name. And when you realized it, you kept quiet. Why? He looked at her for a long time. And then finally he exhaled. Because I didn't know who was behind it. And by the time I found out, it was too late. Who was it? She asked, barely breathing. Drew didn't answer. Which said more than any words ever could. That silence gave Michael what he needed. The next morning, he turned over the recording to a private investigator he'd hired. Someone with a history of working around the law. If the information was true, Drew could face disbarment, financial collapse, maybe even jail time. But Michael wasn't aiming to ruin him. Not yet. He wanted leverage. The strange thing was, the more Michael and Nina worked together, the more their dynamic shifted. Their conversations, once laced with hostility, turned analytical, even cooperative. They both wanted to protect Willow, Wiley, and by extension the family. And Drew, for all his good intentions, had become a threat to that balance. Drew, meanwhile, was unraveling. The deeper he tried to bury the scandal, the more things surfaced. He couldn't trace the original hacker who used Nina's credentials. He couldn't prove he hadn't known about the bribe sooner. Worst of all, his closest allies were distancing themselves. Carly was distracted with her own battles, and Sam had started asking questions he couldn't answer. He tried damage control. A meeting with the judge ended in threats. The judge reminded him that exposure would hurt them both, and if Drew said a word, he'd make sure the blame fell squarely on his shoulders. The walls were closing in. When the story finally broke, leaked anonymously to a rival news outlet, the fallout was immediate. The headline was vague enough not to name names, but the details were unmistakable to anyone who knew the players. Rumors swept through Port Charles. Was Drew Kane involved in a judicial bribery scheme? Had Aurora Media been used as a laundering front? Michael and Nina remained silent. They denied involvement. Publicly, they stayed distant. But privately, they began planning the next phase, salvaging what remained of their reputations, and making sure Drew didn't drag them down with him. For Drew, it was the beginning of the end. Board members withdrew support. Sponsors backed out. Shareholders demanded answers. He held press conferences, denied the allegations, claimed innocence. But the whispers were louder than his statements. He tried to stay afloat, but the tide had turned. In a quiet moment, alone in his office, Drew stared at a photo of Scout. He had told himself everything he did was for her, to build a future, to create something stable. But now that future was cracked. Maybe irreparably. He thought about turning himself in, about coming clean. But before he could make a move, someone else beat him to it. The judge resigned, citing health issues. An internal memo leaked, implicating a broader conspiracy that involved at least 3 other figures, one of them now facing indictment. Drew's name wasn't in the report, but it was only a matter of time. The last straw came when Scout School asked him not to attend an upcoming fundraiser, to avoid distraction. That night, Drew sat in silence. His world had shifted. His image, his influence, his power, all of it had been compromised. And for what? A victory he didn't even ask for. A secret he hadn't even created. But one he had chosen to protect. At the edge of town, Michael and Nina met one last time. It wasn't a partnership built on trust or loyalty, but it had served its purpose. "We protected our family," Michael said. "For now," Nina replied, a hint of sadness in her voice. Because in Port Charles, nothing stayed buried for long. And secrets, even shared ones, had a way of coming back louder the second time. General Hospital spoilers and updates tease there could be a hidden connection between Jen Sidwell and Nina Reeves. They were seen sending cryptic glances across the Metro Court dining room in a recent scene. The question is, why and what are they hiding? What were those furtive looks all about? Why on earth did Nina and Sidwell exchange mysterious glances in the room? Could it be that Willow Tate is the link between Nina and Sidwell? Nina is still finding her footing in motherhood. Her adult daughter Willow entered her life not long ago. Therefore, it's taking some time for Nina and Willow to truly understand that mother-daughter bond. Willow's world was turned upside down when she discovered that her mother wasn't actually Harmony Miller, but instead the woman who gave her life was someone she loathed, Nina. In the end, they set aside their differences and decided to attempt to forge a relationship. As for Nellie Benson, we won't even touch on that today. Nina continues to act according to her true nature. In the upcoming episodes of General Hospital, Nina remains true to her character. She devises plans, manipulates situations, and deceives others, all under the guise of, "I do it for my daughter." Maybe Nina should consider family court regarding custody of Willow. Many would argue that she doesn't genuinely prioritize her daughter's well-being. We all know that Nina is eager to disrupt Willow's relationship with Congressman Drew Kane. She is taking every possible action to cut those connections, except for the one thing she truly needs to do: be honest. The issue is that if Nina reveals the truth about her affair with Drew, she risks losing Willow for good. Nina isn't willing to lose Willow. Nina is not prepared to take that risk. Nevertheless, Rumors suggest that Nina is already on a path to ruin her relationship with her daughter, whether or not her dirty little secret is revealed. In a previous episode of General Hospital, Nina and Sidwell exchanged curious glances from across the room. What could possibly lead those two to share such an unspoken bond? Rumors suggest that Nina is actually the one behind the custody ruling. It seems illogical for it to be Sidwell's idea to bribe the judge, even if it appeared that way. If it's not one deception, it's another with Nina. It seems that Nina may have gone to great lengths to ensure the breakup of Willow and Drew. According to the most recent spoilers and rumors from General Hospital, Nina's link to Sidwell is through Willow. For weeks now, whispers have been circling Port Charles about John Sidwell, the enigmatic investment mogul who had quietly begun acquiring commercial properties in town. He wasn't a household name like Sonny Corinthos or Valentine Cassadine, but those who knew power recognized it in the subtle way Sidwell moved. His name never showed up in headlines, yet his influence was quietly growing, especially in spaces where finances and backroom deals ruled the day. At first, his presence didn't raise many eyebrows. Port Charles had seen its fair share of wealthy outsiders passing through with ambitious projects and big promises. But this felt different. And when Nina Reeves was spotted leaving a private meeting with Sidwell at the Harborview restaurant late one evening, questions started bubbling to the surface. The sighting wasn't an accident. One of the deception interns had been at the restaurant with her date and had spotted Nina across the room, seated at a secluded booth, deep in conversation with Sidwell. No wine, no flirting, just two people talking with a level of intensity that didn't match the usual small talk between acquaintances. When Nina noticed she'd been recognized, her smile faltered for a beat too long. The intern mentioned it to Maxie the next morning, more out of curiosity than anything, but Maxie's reaction was immediate. She knew Nina had been trying to stay low-key after everything with Sonny and the SSE unraveling. So why was she meeting with a mysterious financier like Sidwell, and why in secret? Maxie brought it up to Sasha, not to stir trouble but to clear the air. Sasha's concern deepened as she remembered something that had slipped by unnoticed weeks ago. A small shift in Crimson's financial ledger. A new anonymous investor had bought a significant silent stake. Nina had brushed it off, claiming it was a friend who believed in her vision for the magazine. But Sasha now wondered if Sidwell had been that friend, and if so, what he really wanted in return. Spinelli got involved shortly after. When he started digging into Sidwell's recent business dealings, it became clear he wasn't just an investor. He was also acquiring influence. He had recently taken over a controlling interest in a digital publishing firm that specialized in political messaging. He'd also funded a biotech startup that, curiously, had former ties to the same foundation Nina had once donated to during her Crimson charity campaigns. These weren't coincidences. The pattern pointed to something more deliberate, something coordinated. What Spinelli couldn't find, however, was the connective tissue. Why would Sidwell be helping Nina? Was he blackmailing her? Was she helping him? Or were they both involved in something bigger, something that hadn't yet come to light? When Michael Corinthos got wind of the potential Sidwell-Nina link, his reaction was measured but alert. He hadn't forgotten Nina's betrayals, and if she was now involved with someone with opaque motives, he wanted to know why. He had Willow to think about and Wiley, and he wasn't willing to let Nina sink her claws into their lives again under the guise of reinvention. Michael discreetly reached out to Olivia Falconeri, who had retained limited but important oversight at the Metro Court, and asked her if she'd noticed anything unusual. Olivia confirmed that Sidwell had been a guest several times in the past month. He always paid in cash. No entourage. No obvious security. Yet there was always the sense that he was watching everything, taking notes even when pretending not to. Olivia had clocked it, and she didn't like it. Meanwhile, Nina remained tight-lipped. When Maxie asked her point-blank if she knew Sidwell outside of business, Nina offered a carefully rehearsed smile and said, "He's just someone who's interested in Port Charles's economic growth. Nothing scandalous, Maxie." But Maxie wasn't convinced. She'd seen Nina dodge before. She could spot the deflection, the change in pitch, the way Nina always looked away when she was lying or protecting something, or someone. A breakthrough came unexpectedly from Ava Jerome. Always perceptive, Ava had grown suspicious of Nina's recent mood swings. One day she was calm and upbeat, the next she was anxious, distracted, checking her phone with a sort of desperation she tried to mask. Ava had assumed it was about Sunny residual guilt, perhaps. But one evening at the gallery, Nina let something slip. She mentioned, absent-mindedly, that certain secrets don't stay buried when money gets involved. Ava caught it instantly. What money? What secrets? Nina covered quickly, but Ava was already curious. She waited until Nina left, then made a quiet call to an old contact in New York, someone who had once run in Sidwell's social circles. The contact was cryptic but said one thing that stuck with Ava. If Sidwell's sniffing around Port Charles, he's not looking to invest. He's looking to leverage. And he's always had a strange fascination with Nina Reeves, ever since that retreat in Montauk. A retreat? Ava didn't know what that meant, so she brought it to Valentine. Valentine went quiet for a long time after Ava mentioned Montauk. Then slowly he revealed that nearly 10 years ago, before Nina had re-emerged in Port Charles, she'd spent some time at a private facility in Montauk under the name Catherine Forbes, part of a rehabilitation program for high-profile clients. It was one of the few times Nina had truly disappeared, long before she returned and found out about Nellie, long before she reclaimed Crimson. Valentine had discovered it during one of his deeper background searches on Nina, but had never brought it up, respecting her right to privacy. But now, with Sidwell's name linked to Montauk, everything was coming into focus. Sidwell had also been a donor to the facility where Nina had stayed. His presence there wasn't just as a benefactor. He had attended one of the wellness summits that overlapped with Nina's stay. It was rumored that he often used such retreats to identify vulnerable, influential people who could later be drawn into his network. Nina may have been one of those people. If that was true, then the connection between Sidwell and Nina ran far deeper than anyone had imagined. Not just a recent partnership, but a relationship rooted in something older. A time when Nina had been at her lowest, seeking peace after her coma and the destruction of her past life. Had Sidwell taken her under his wing? Helped her in exchange for something? Had she agreed to anything she hadn't remembered until now? The implications were disturbing. Spinelli expanded his search parameters. He found a paper trail, sparse but present, that Nina had received a trust fund deposit from an unnamed corporate entity several years ago. It had appeared shortly after the Montauk visit. Nina had used some of the funds to buy her stake in Crimson. It wasn't just Valentine's money after all. There had been another silent backer. Spinelli cross-referenced the banking data and found it routed through 3 shell companies. All of them eventually linked back to a firm in Switzerland. A firm Sidwell once chaired. Now the picture was clearer. Sidwell had bankrolled Nina's re-entry into the business world, and possibly helped her reinvent her public image. He hadn't just appeared in her life recently. He had been part of her story from the beginning. Whether Nina had known the full extent of his plans or had merely been a pawn was still unclear. But what was clear now was that they shared a past, one layered in secrecy, manipulation, and likely a fair amount of debt, whether emotional or financial. Valentine warned Nina that people were closing in on the truth. She didn't react well. "That part of my life is buried," she insisted. "It has nothing to do with what's happening now." But Valentine didn't buy it. "Then why is he back?" he asked. "Why now?" Nina didn't answer. She wasn't ready to admit that Sidwell had reappeared with a favor to collect. He had made it sound simple. A small push for a development contract, a quiet endorsement from the Crimson platform, maybe some leverage with the mayor's office through her social circle. But when she hesitated, he'd reminded her, "You owe me. I gave you your life back when everyone else had turned their back on you." The words haunted her. She had taken his help because she'd had no one else. Because at the time he'd seemed like a lifeline. But Nina had learned the hard way that every favor had a price. And Sidwell's price was only just beginning to emerge. He wanted access to Crimson's subscriber data, the analytics, the names, the demographics. He claimed it was for a marketing test. Nina knew better. That kind of data was powerful in the right or wrong hands. She refused. He pushed harder. "I'll make it seem like an internal audit," he said. "No one will know." She still said no. That's when he reminded her about Montauk. About the other things she'd shared during those vulnerable days, when she'd still been on medication and struggling to separate memory from hallucination. He hinted that her file, private therapy notes, confessions, might not be as sealed as she thought. The threat was unspoken but understood. Now Nina was backed into a corner. If she told anyone, she risked exposure. If she did nothing, she risked giving Sidwell power she couldn't control. And as the people closest to her began to suspect something, the weight of the secret grew unbearable. Michael and Carly began preparing for legal action if it turned out that Crimson was being used for unethical data practices. Valentine made plans to buy Sidwell out if necessary. Ava warned Nina she had one chance to come clean before someone else exposed everything. And still Nina hesitated. Because the real secret wasn't just that Sidwell had helped her. It was that during Montauk, in one of her lowest moments, she had written a letter, a confession, about her feelings toward her mother, toward Madeline Reeves. She had written that she'd sometimes wished her mother dead, that she blamed her for every loss, every betrayal. It had been a cathartic exercise, nothing more. Or so she'd thought. That letter, she now feared, was in Sidwell's hands. And if he ever released it, or even whispered of it to the wrong person, it could reopen old wounds, destroy her credibility, and tear apart the fragile peace she had built with Willow. The young woman she was trying desperately to prove herself to. The daughter of the woman she had once despised. So Nina stayed silent. But her silence only fed the mystery. And the longer she waited, the more dangerous Sidwell became. His influence in Port Charles grew stronger with each passing day, and more people began to feel the chill of his presence. What had started as a private favor was quickly unraveling into a dangerous game of leverage, fear, and power. And at the center of it all stood Nina, caught between the truth she was too afraid to speak and the man who might take everything from her if she didn't obey. The storm was coming. Port Charles just didn't know it yet. According to General Hospital spoilers, Willow Tate may make a bold move that will shock Michael Corinthos. A trip to the pool could result in a disturbing encounter, so let's discuss what's coming up from June 30th to July 4th. Willow is determined to get her children back, so she has decided to marry Drew Kane as part of a legal strategy. However, Michael aims to postpone the visitation hearing for as long as possible in order to ensure Willow receives nothing. Willow is likely to become frustrated if Michael delays their next court date. Willow requested that Nina Reeves meet her at the Metro Court pool the previous time Wiley Corinthos had a swim lesson. Willow definitely wanted to bump into Wiley, but Nina said she couldn't challenge the judge's ruling. Unfortunately, Willow rarely listens to Nina's advice. That is why, when Wiley's next swimming class comes along, Willow may follow suit. We know Michael will take Wiley to the pool in future episodes. Something unsettling is about to happen there. Therefore, all clues point to Willow ambushing Wiley in a desperate attempt to spend time with her son. Willow is, of course, somewhat stressed these days. Michael may be concerned about Willow's behavior for a variety of reasons, including the fact that she appears agitated and scares Wiley. Furthermore, the children are already puzzled about the custody status, and when they will be able to see their mother again. Willow's sudden appearance in Wiley's life will only raise more issues for Michael to answer. Michael will be upset if he has to remove Wiley away from Willow as she causes a disturbance. This could make Michael even more desperate to keep Willow out of the picture. So stay tuned for updates on the fallout from Willow's probable public meltdown. According to General Hospital teasers, Michael will receive some disturbing news and will be dealing with a lot more family drama. The day began with a deceptive silence in Port Charles, one of those humid late summer mornings that hung heavy in the air, implying storm clouds or some type of tension about to break. Charlie's pub had been crowded as usual, with residents sipping coffee and catching up on town gossip. It was the kind of tranquility that made people forget how swiftly things may change. However, at the end of the day, everything would be different. Christina Corinthos Davis had been working behind the bar at Charlie's, her sleeves rolled up while she poured drinks, sorted receipts, and kept the atmosphere light for the lunch crowd. She'd recently found her groove again, taking pride in her position as manager, stepping up more at the juvenile shelter, and maintaining firm boundaries with her family, even when their drama tried to creep in. For once, everything felt stable. Willow Corinthos was at the Metro Court rooftop pool with Wiley, attempting to re-establish some sense of regularity in their summer routine. Wiley splashed with another child near the shallow end, laughing freely, as Willow watched from a nearby beach chair. She'd been silent lately, still absorbing the recent drama of Nina's betrayal, Michael's difficult relationship with Sonny, and the weight of returning to teaching part-time while caring for her health and family.